Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just give us a couple of minutes while some others join us. Thank you so much. All right, perfect. Again, thank you so much. Good morning and welcome to this virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so excited to have you with us this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation and save your questions for the end. If you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function. You can add questions to the chat box at any time, and we will go ahead and answer those at the very end when we open them up for a question and answer section. If you are joining us over Facebook Live, you can do the same using the comment section there. You can drop your question and we'll be monitoring that, and we can answer those questions at the end as well. Lastly, this presentation is being recorded and being live streamed via Facebook. So if you would like to access this talk or any other previous talks done by the Timken, please feel free to check out our Facebook and our YouTube channels where you can go ahead and find those previous tours. And so without further ado, I'm so excited to present our docent for today, Eleanor, who's going to be presenting on saints and how to identify them in works of art. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to her. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
Oh, thank you, Samantha. Well, good morning. Excuse me. My name is Eleanor Merle, and I'm a docent with the Timken Museum. And today I'm delighted to share with you masterworks from the Timken collection. Most of us, upon entering a church, don't recognize more than a handful of the saints featured in the stained glass windows, sculptures, altarpieces, and other decorative or liturgical elements in the building. Christianity is a long, vibrant, diverse, and often complex tradition that's responsible for some of the greatest works of art in history. Symbolism of Christian saints has been used from the very beginning of the religion. Each saint is said to have led an exemplary life, and symbols have been used to tell these stories throughout the history of the church. Typically, Christian saints are represented by a symbol or iconic motif associated with their life, and this is termed an attribute or an emblem, and in order to identify them. They were particularly used so that the illiterate could recognize a scene and give each of the saints something of a personality in art. They're often carried in the hand by the saint. In today's presentation, we'll take a look at the attributes that help us distinguish among the saints as they're typically represented in works of art. Now, just how did these attributes become associated with their respective saint? Well, you can thank a little book called The Golden Legend by Jacobus de Voragine from about 1260 for these relatively easily recognized visual cues, as it goes into detail about the lives of the saints and was an important resource for many Western artists. Though not factually accurate by modern standards of historical accuracy, it acted as an entertaining source that impacted visual depictions of saints for years. Now let's begin in our icon gallery. Icons are images of holy figures and are the prevalent art form within the Russian Orthodox Church. When you enter a Russian Orthodox church, you see these icons displayed on an iconostasis, or a wall of icons that separates the sanctuary and the nave. The iconostasis represents an extraordinary theological and visual synthesis of their faith. It symbolizes the boundary between the divine and human worlds, a window through which the faithful glimpse the sacred world beyond. We'll take a look first at a group of icons that date from the 15th century and are attributed to the Novgorod school in Russia, known for its high artistic quality and prolific output. The 7 icons we are viewing form the deesis, or prayer row, the first row in the iconostasis above the royal gates, which is where priests enter the sanctuary from the nave. By tradition, the deesis depicts Jesus enthroned like an emperor in his heavenly court on the day of judgment, receiving the prayers of those who intercede for the salvation of humanity. Standing to Jesus's right and left, respectively, are the Virgin Mary and St. John the Baptist, flanked by the archangels Michael and Gabriel and the saints Peter and Paul. The archangels are represented with spears and staffs in hand in red hymations, which are an outer garment worn by the ancient Greeks, and these are thrown over one shoulder. St. Peter is shown as an elderly man with gray hair and a beard. His left hand holds a scroll and a key on a string. The key signifies the keys to the kingdom of heaven, as told in the book of Matthew. Jesus is holding a closed gospel in his left hand and raising his right hand in blessing. Notice the images of church fathers in much smaller scale, standing 3 to each side at the upper edge of the panel. Including patron saints was a favorite element in Novgorod icons. In this case, based on their clothing and hats, it's likely the church fathers in the top left are Russian saints. Now, Orthodox Christian culture has a strong visual orientation, and the depiction of saints, accessible to the illiterate and literate alike, was a powerful cohesive force in society. Icons provided an aid to worship and an instrument for transmitting religious stories and teachings. In other words, a theology in pictures rather than in words. Figures are represented not in their natural form, but rather in their two-dimensional, stylized heavenly form, as seen by elongated features. For example, the graceful, elongated fingers with the tapered ends, creating the sense of movement upwards toward the heavens. The head was never painted in profile, and the large, almond-shaped, soulful eyes are the most prominent feature of the face. The colors used were symbolic, and they were known by the faithful, thereby simplifying their understanding of the messages. Jesus is shown wearing a red robe covered in a blue-green cloak. The red symbolizes humanity, the blood of Christ, and the blue outer garment represents divinity. Hence, Jesus's divinity wraps his humanity. Mary is the opposite. She wears her signature blue robe with a red cloak covering her head. This shows that she gave birth to a divine being despite her humanity. Throughout history, blue has been considered a sacred and valuable hue. It's not a naturally occurring pigment and is thus particularly mystical and rare. One of the earliest true blue pigments produced was ultramarine, a color made from lapis lazuli, a costly stone once more precious than gold. In art, it was reserved for only the most elevated subjects. The Egyptians began importing lapis lazuli from Afghanistan around 60,000 years ago, but it was only in the early 5th century that blue became associated with the Virgin Mary and started to be referred to as Marian blue. The golden background of the icons is a symbol of the spiritual world and divine radiance. It conveys the magnificence of the heavenly kingdom where there is no night. Now, in the center of the iconostasis are the royal doors, as I mentioned, through which the clergy passed between the nave and the sanctuary. You could see them here. And according to Orthodox tradition, the doors are flanked by two large icons. On the right, Christ the Savior, and on the left, Mother of God. We'll next take a look at our Georgian Mother of God icon, also known as the Virgin Hodegetria or Guide from the 17th century. The Virgin is always known in an icon context as the Mother of God. The icon is painted on wood in the egg-based tempera paint with the gold leaf covering evoking the glories of heaven. The Mother of God is depicted in the traditional pose of the Hodegetria, which is Greek for pointer of the way. The Virgin gestures with her right hand to the Christ child as being the way, the truth, and the life. The letters on either side of the Virgin's head signify Mary, Mother of God. The letters above Christ's halo stand for Jesus Christ. His halo contains a cross and the Greek abbreviation for I am. The Christ child, appearing more like an old man than a toddler, wears a short white tunic under a striated orange and gold royal chiton. He offers the Virgin Mary a sheaf of wheat, symbolizing the bread, which in Christian tradition becomes the body of Christ or the Eucharist at communion. The heads are set off by elaborate stippled engraved halos. Mary wears a green-blue undergarment and a red mephorion, and this is the long red veil covering the head and body that married Jewish women wear. It's embroidered with 3 8-pointed stars called the Stella Maris. The stars are the attribute by which we know a figure is Mary. And while it was difficult to see, they did also appear in the depiction of Mary's veil in the Deesis image. The Stella Maris symbolize eternal virginity before, during, and after the Nativity. Now you'll note numerous nail holes from an ornamental protective silver covering, which is called an oclad or revêtement or riza. And here's a example of an oclad or riza. Now, again, it protected the icon from being touched by the faithful, but it left uncovered the head and the hands of the saint so they could be visible for prayer. Now, an icon in the Orthodox Christian Church is a sign of the presence of God. Tradition considers the origin of the icon to be divine and revealed, just as Christians consider the gospel texts to be the work of divine revelation. As such, the authenticity of each image depends on its resemblance to the original. Now, the intention is to stylize the holy images in a timeless way, separating them from daily life and turning the worshippers' thoughts to heaven. As such, Mary's large ears are to better hear the words of God. Her closed mouth is to show that you're not supposed to speak in the presence of God. Her large almond eyes, sorrowful and perhaps portend the suffering of her child. This was Anne and Abe's favorite icon, Putnam Sisters, and they displayed it in the library in their San Diego home. Now, as background, most of these icons left Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, when they otherwise would have been destroyed. Now, also highly venerated is Saint Basil, depicted in our next work with scenes from his life. The icon dates from the 16th century and was painted by the Moscow School. Saint Basil, a 4th century archbishop and doctor of the Eastern Church, established the basis of monastic life in the Eastern Church. He was the leader of a sect of Orthodox believers and was active in helping the needy. He built a hospice and a large complex to minister to the sick and attracted huge crowds with his preaching. In this icon, he's shown full length with a gospel book in his left hand. His right hand is raised in a 2-fingered blessing. A 3/4 length figure of Christ is depicted in a roundel above his right hand, and another of the Blessed Mary appears in a roundel above the gospel. 14 scenes of St. Basil's life surround the main figure, which include his birth in 329 AD, ascetic retreat, anointment as bishop, and various other important events such as preaching, and finally, his burial on the right. After becoming bishop of Cappadocia, he founded an ideal city called Basilates with churches, monasteries, and buildings dedicated to caring for the sick and housing pilgrims. Now, the large size of this icon suggests that it once hung on a church wall. The icon is known as a vita icon, defined by the framing of a saint with depictions of events from his or her life. That St. Basil was selected to be the subject of a vita icon indicates the esteem in which the saint was held posthumously. Though he's credited with performing a number of miracles, Basil was primarily revered for the monastery and hospital that he built after becoming Bishop of Cappadocia, and for authoring one of the most frequently used liturgies in the Orthodox Church. He's to monks of the East what Saint Benedict is to the West, and Basil's principles influence Eastern monasticism today. So how do we recognize the focus of this icon as Saint Basil? Well, he's depicted in icons as thin and ascetic with a long, tapering black beard. Another distinguishing feature is the omophorion around his collar. In the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic liturgical tradition, the omophorium is the distinguishing vestment of a bishop and the symbol of his spiritual and ecclesiastical authority. Originally woven of wool, it's a band of brocade decorated with 4 crosses and an 8-pointed star. It's worn around the neck and shoulders. This is one of the most important and ancient elements of bishops' vestments, without which they may not perform their sacramental duties. Basil was tireless in pastoral care. He preached twice a day to huge crowds, and best known as an orator, he built a hospital called A Wonder of the World. As a youth, he'd organized famine relief and worked in a soup kitchen himself, and he fought the prostitution business. Though not recognized greatly in his lifetime, his writings rightly place him among the great teachers of the church. 72 years after his death, the Council of Chalcedon described him, and I quote, as the great Basil, minister of grace, who has expounded the truth to the whole world. So let's now take a look at a depiction of the Madonna and Child by the Italian artist Nicola da Buonaccorso, which dates from 1387. Nicola da Buonaccorso was one of several leaders to emerge from Siena during the 1300s. Following in the large footsteps of Duccio and Simone Martini, he had a brief but well-documented career in which he received commissions to paint everything from book covers to frescoed ceilings. He made chapel decorations for Siena's main cathedral and images for nearby churches. His work can be found in major museums throughout the world today. This painting was the central panel of a now disassembled, signed and dated altarpiece. The size and lavishness of the panel suggests that the triptych was an expensive commission. The Virgin Mary and Child are seated on a large Gothic throne symbolizing the church. The Madonna's features mirror the Byzantine features we saw in the Georgian Mother of God icon: a thin nose, elongated face, fingers, and hands. She wears a gilt robe symbolizing royalty and a blue mantle, the color of heaven. Note the technique of sgraffito to represent the texture of her gold robe. The baby Jesus is offering her a white rose, a symbol of purity. The face and body of the child look like an old man, again, as in the icon we saw, with the same elongated fingers and feet. He wears a pink garment and holds a basket of strawberries on his lap. The strawberry is sacred to the Virgin Mary. It symbolizes spiritual purity, righteousness, and perfect nobility of spirit. Mary wears a crown and both figures have a halo. Unlike icons and earlier medieval depictions of the Virgin and Child, here the two figures are looking at each other. This reflects the increasing humanistic and naturalistic tendencies of the emerging Renaissance. It makes the viewer feel as if they're witnessing an intimate moment. Notice also the strong suggestion of depth and an attempt, albeit not fully successful, at one point perspective. The Virgin Mary has been called the rose without thorns. An early legend by St. Ambrose tells how the rose grew without thorns until the fall of man. The Virgin is represented in many Italian paintings as Maria della Rose, holding a rose, or in this case, held by the child. As noted, white roses symbolize purity. The Virgin was especially important to the Sienese, who credited her with intercession with their victory over Florence in the Battle of Monteperti in 1260. The extensive use of blue and gold, very expensive pigments, as we mentioned, as well as her large size, are a testimony to the importance of the Virgin Mary. We now move on to a devotional work also by Niccolo di Buonaccorso, the Madonna of Humility, done a bit earlier in 1370 to 75, when the artist was only in his 20s. This work is small and intense. The little triptych, a three-part hinged image, was almost certainly intended for private use by a wealthy patron. Its interior is divided into 6 zones. In the center panel, the Virgin Mary with the Christ child on her lap is seated on a magnificent marble floor. Now, it's quite unusual to show the Virgin seated on the ground, and this, of course, is to represent her humility. Behind her, on a bench of carved and inlaid wood, lie simple tools of domesticity: a spindle, bobbins with colored thread, and knitting needles. Before her marriage to Joseph, Mary had been one of the virgins chosen to weave a veil for the temple, and the sewing instruments symbolize her chastity and humility. Again, we see the use of sgraffito for the Virgin's gold robe, as we did in the Madonna and Child. On the left stands St. Catherine of Alexandria, a virgin martyr famed for her beauty and learning. She's crowned and holds a red book in her right hand. Her left hand, holding a palm branch, rests on the symbol of her attempted martyrdom, a spiked wheel. We'll be seeing St. Catherick again in a later work. Now, St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, is in the right wing of the triptych, and he wades through the waters of a river filled with fish. We know it's St. Christopher by his very large size, crude dress, and large staff. Also characteristically, he carries the Christ child on his shoulder. The child carries a globe of the world in his left hand, and as St. Christopher crosses the river, his burden becomes heavier and heavier, and he realizes the child is in fact Jesus Christ, who has taken on the sins of mankind and carries with him the weight of the world. In the central triangle on the top, the crucified Christ is adored by a kneeling St. Francis, who embraces the foot of the cross. Framing the upper register on either side of the crucifixion, the angel Gabriel on the left announces to the Virgin Mary on the right that she will bear the Son of God. This triptych is a portable altarpiece, which may explain the inclusion of St. Christopher, the protector of travelers. It's probably one of the first portable shrines dealing with this subject. It's worth noting that much of this time, the image would not have been seen, as the triptych would have been closed like a book, except when being used as a focus for prayer. Finally, notice the decoration of the frame on this painting, gilded and punched. It represents the highest level to which Sienese craftsmen aspired in the 14th century. We're ready now to leave the Virgin Mary for a time and take a look at another saint, Saint Anthony. Our next work is entitled Torment of Saint Anthony, sometimes referred to as the Temptation of Saint Anthony. The work dates from 1515 to 1520 and is by the Italian artist Giovanni Girolamo Savaldo. Saint Anthony, a Christian hermit, gave his wealth to the poor when he was a young man. Living in solitude, he devoted himself to prayer, but was tormented by the devil in the form of demons and evil spirits. In this work, Saint Anthony emerges into sunlight, raising his hands heavenward and thanking God for his deliverance. His hands direct the viewer to look toward the monastery in the background, perhaps a reminder that Saint Anthony is considered the father of monasticism. A large rock formation divides the picture between positive and negative alternatives. On the left, the calm beauty of the lush pastoral landscape symbolizes human salvation. On the right, monstrous and terrifying creatures romp in a hellish terrain, eerily lit by a giant conflagration in the background indicated by tones of red, and this represents hell. Dark, ominous creatures dominate the front portion of this right side. Through an archway, a sailing ship, bathed in supernatural light, seems to be stranded, a metaphorical inference perhaps to the underworld. Savaldo's painting is a free interpretation of the principal account of Anthony's temptations found in the biography written shortly after his death by a follower, Saint Athanasius. He tells how Anthony distributed all that he owned to the poor and sought God in the solitude of the Egyptian desert. The desert offered not only peace and tranquility for communion with God, but also trials created by the devil. After Anthony had proved that he could remain resolute in the face of sexual temptation, the devil tormented him with visions of unnatural beings. Then, suddenly, when Anthony thought he couldn't take it anymore, Christ appeared in a bright light and the demons were gone. Artists often took great license in representing Anthony's temptations. delighting in the opportunity to explore the fantastic. Savaldo seems to reinterpret the original source so that the event takes place not in the original cave setting, but in the natural world. The saint himself achieves liberation as he runs into the light. In this, the painting is perhaps an illustration of Anthony's ability to discern good from evil, regardless of its form. The message seems to be that human curiosity about strange creatures could seduce one into the hellish scenes beyond. The beautiful, unspoiled landscape presents the alternative. His hands direct the viewer to look toward the monastery in the background, perhaps a reminder that St. Anthony is considered the father of monasticism. Now, it's been suggested that the painting was commissioned by the order of the monastery in the background, the Church of the Carmine. But because of its negativity, the painting was probably not an altarpiece. Here's a version of the story which was painted by the adolescent Michelangelo. And this is a more common depiction, and it's of fantastical creatures flying through the air, holding on to St. Anthony. Like other northern painters of the time, Savaldo was interested in Flemish painting, particularly Hieronymus Bosch's nightmarish monsters, which influenced his depiction of St. Anthony's tormentors. In fact, 3 of these fantastical creatures show up in Bosch's Last Judgment triptych, which was done about a generation earlier. One researcher has suggested that Savaldo would have seen Bosch's work in Cardinal Domenico Grimani's collection in Venice. Scholars believe Savaldo was born around 1480 in Brescia, which is northern Italy, but didn't spend much time there. Traces of his presence appear in Painters Guild records in Florence in 1508, and he had some commissions in Milan in the early 1530s. But he seems to have remained in Venice for the vast majority of his career and probably died in the Veneto sometime in or shortly after 1548. He was a master of the Venetian Renaissance, known for specializing in nocturnal scenes of religious subjects, like this bizarre and terrifying one, with dramatic contrasts between light and dark elements. Now, we have one more Virgin in our presentation today, a very different portrayal, the Virgin of Sorrows with Donors from 1564 by the Flemish artist Pieter Claessens the Elder, or Pieter Claessens the First. The center panel of this work depicts a tearful Virgin with the 7 sorrows, key events from her life represented in this case by swords arrayed halo-like around her head. The sorrows are a popular devotion and are frequently depicted in art. Interestingly, it's not clear as to exactly where Mary is sitting in the image. The Catholic Church has confessionals, but this doesn't appear to be a confessional. Something still being explored is the unusual use of swords to recognize the 7 sorrows. It's more typical to see the sorrows represented as individual scenes surrounding the figure of the Virgin. Here's such an example. The panel on the right has the father lettering underneath lists his age as 50 and 3 sons. The left-hand panel depicts the mother, who's age 49, and 2 daughters. They're dressed simply in black and praying. The piece was probably done for the altar of the family's chapel. The wings were hinged so they could be closed or open at certain times of the year. Now, Michael Brown who is San Diego Museum of Art's associate curator of European art, stated that a painting like this was a way for the family to say, and I quote, "This is who we are." It almost becomes a statement of identity, a way to put down roots in a community, end of quote. And that was especially important to people as they moved around in what was then a far-flung Spanish empire. Now note that Claessens was the patriarch of a Flemish family of painters. Because Belgium was ruled by Philip II of Spain at the time, the artist probably had a Spanish clientele. As such, the family who commissioned this piece was probably Spanish. While the family hasn't been identified, each of the two side panels has a coat of arms on the back. Archivists in Belgium are looking through records to see if they can match the crests with family names. Another part of the painting still being explored is the unusual use of swords, as we mentioned earlier. Now, this triptych has a fascinating story associated with it. When the San Diego art collectors, Sandy and Bram Dijkstra, bought the 400-year-old painting of the Virgin Mary at auction in 1982 for a meager $2,000, they knew it had been the center section of a large altarpiece. Or a triptych, and it wasn't large, but it was a triptych. They could see on the wood frame where there had been hinges connecting the panels. They hung the Virgin of Sorrows in their home and never thought it would be reunited with its missing wings. But this is where Michael Brown saw it in their home. He'd been told about it by John Marchiari, his predecessor at SDMA. Well, in 2015, John Marchiari was looking through a catalog for a Christie's auction in Amsterdam. He saw a photo taken in about 1910 of a triptych. Its two side panels were for sale. Marcia recognized the center panel, the one not being sold, and he sent an email to the Dijkstras saying, "I think these are your wings and you must buy them." They agreed to put in a bid and they got them. The auction price for the wings was $43,000. Now, Brown said it doesn't appear the works ever left Europe. He thinks a dealer separated them after the 1910 photo was taken and sold the side panels as one piece and the center panel as another. This kind of thing is not unusual in the art world. The wings were shipped to the Dijkstras, who took them to the Balboa Art Conservation Center for treatment and a reunification with the center panel. So the story has a fairy tale ending. We'll now go back to Italy with a work by Paolo Veronese, Madonna and Child with Saint Elizabeth, the infant Saint John, the Baptist, and Saint Catherine, dating from 1565 to 1570. Paolo Veronese was known as the great decorator of the Venetian Renaissance. He painted arguably larger, more complex and colorful compositions than any other master of his day. Here, St. Catherine appears on the right, dressed in costly fabrics. Her hair is entwined with pearls. She also holds the palm of martyrdom in her right hand, and her left leg is resting on a portion of the wheel, her attribution. So recall that we also saw the palm and the wheel in our Madonna of Humility by Buonaccorso. Revered as an advocate for the faithful, St. Catherine reaches out to the Christ child who turns toward her lovingly. The picture is full of touching human details. Jesus's young cousin, St. John the Baptist, dressed in animal fur, an attribute representing how he grew up in the wilderness, plays with the baby's toes, while his elderly mother, St. Elizabeth, folds swaddling cloths atop the empty cradle. The Virgin Mary seems sad and preoccupied, as if contemplating her son's tragic but inevitable future. The subject of this painting is not strictly biblical. Rather, it's what's known as a sacra conversazione, or holy conversation, in which the Virgin and Child appear with a changing cast of saints in a relatively informal grouping. Such depictions were hugely popular in 16th century Italy. Paintings, including the Virgin, Child, and St. John the Baptist, could be found in most wealthy households, personalized by the inclusion of saints who shared the names of the householders or of their families. So in this case, St. Catherine and Elizabeth may refer to the original owners of this painting. Veronese's famed mastery of color is nowhere better revealed than in St. Catherine's dress, with its shifting hues of yellow, pink, silver, and blue. This work was created during the late Renaissance, during what's known as the Mannerist period, and painters of this period were starting to move away from the characteristics of the high Renaissance artists. And you'll see this represented by the somewhat elongated figure of St. Catherine and the more intense coloration. Born and raised in the city of Verona, hence his nickname, Paolo Veronese gained his fame in Venice for his frescoes and other architectural decorations, as well as easel paintings while living in Venice. He was best known for light-hearted compositions that celebrated the material wealth and opulence of Venetian society. His love of color, light, and elaborate pageantry even brought him in conflict with the Inquisition, a 16th century Catholic institution dedicated to quashing heresy. And because of the Inquisition, there's a story about how he needed to change the name of a painting he had done of the Last Supper. And it was so blasphemous to the church because of what it depicted that he renamed it Feast in the House of Levi. Veronese dominated Venetian painting in the late 16th century, and he influenced European artists for generations to come. Our last work depicts Saint Francis in meditation. It's by the Spanish artist Zurbarán, and it dates from 1635. Zurbarán is recognized as one of the greatest Spanish painters of the Baroque era, the 17th century. His commissions came primarily from religious orders in Seville, where he established a studio in 1629. St. Francis was the subject of many paintings by Spanish artists during the Counter-Reformation, which occurred during the Baroque period. And this was largely due to the pious transformation involved in his story. Originally a wealthy merchant's son living in opulence, he renounced all worldly goods following his conversion to Christianity in the early 1200s. For the Council of Trent, which met in the years 1545 to 1563, and promoted art that encouraged Protestant wanderers back to the Catholic faith, this scene embodied the attitude of life-altering repentance which they wished to inspire. In this desire, works of the Counter-Reformation often strove to involve the viewer with a clear narrative, drama, and emotion, as well as the depiction of saints as spiritual role models and intercessors. Saint Francis of Assisi was a mystic, a poet, and a founder of the Franciscan order in the 13th century, and this was a mendicant order. Interestingly, his pointed cap is not of the Franciscan order, it's of the Capuchin order, which may mean that the Capuchins commissioned the work. Originally, St. Francis was painted simply as a charitable man, often with animals surrounding him, as he believed all creatures were brothers and sisters under God, and he also cared for the poor and the sick. But over time, the style changed to depicting him as a man of intense religion devotion. Zurbaran painted approximately 34 versions of St. Francis. In this composition, Zurbaran shows the saint in a moment of profound contemplation, deeply in prayer, in ecstasy, with his face illuminated from the left. As typical in the Baroque era, he uses somber, rich color with an intense play of light and shadow to create a highly dramatic moment. The skull is a symbol of death and refers to Christ's crucifixion. Meditation on death was particularly favored by the Jesuits, and saints contemplating skulls are frequently found in 17th century Italian and Spanish painting. Our tour has now come to a close. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the attributes associated with various saints, and by which you'll be able to identify them in other works of art. Thank you for your participation, and I'm glad to open it up to any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. What a wonderful presentation. So comprehensive. Thank you so much. A virtual round of applause. I already have a couple of questions. I also see some thanks in the chat from Becky as well, saying excellent presentation. So thank you so much, Becky. I do have a question from Facebook saying, I can see now how these paintings presented easily recognizable symbols for an illiterate populace. Which is true. The little squares on our tech devices are just as recognizable for us. The use of the word icon is a very interesting choice. Are these the new icons we pray to? Which is a very interesting comment. What do you think, Eleanor?
I'm sorry, are which of
like the fact that we have little icons kind of on our phones, like is that kind of
yeah,
like our
the
new icon?
emoji. Yeah, well, the icon is not exclusive to these, early, the term icon, as we all well know, figures, important figures are called icons. So certainly we can, we will have developed our icons of our own in the current age.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I see Sharon is raising her hand. You can go ahead, Sharon.
Yes, hi, thank you.
Of
There
course.
there was a slide that was briefly on that reminded me of Bosch. Can you show that slide a little
yes,
longer?
yeah, Savaldo. Let's see if I can get back up to it. Here we go. There it is.
No, not that one, the one after it.
The one after, oh, this one, Michelangelo?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. That one was only on briefly. I really wanted to look at that.
Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you.
Michelangelo, and he was just a teenager when
Wow.
when he did this. So his superior skill was recognizable. And as I mentioned, it was more typical to show this rendition of the Torments of St. Anthony.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, quite welcome.
Thank you so much. I also see your comment saying that the Veronese is such a loving view of the women and children, which is true. It's like a very like touching kind of portrayal between all of them. So thank you again for that comment.
Sure.
If there are any other questions, I believe we can take one more, but while you may be typing, I will just mention, as I said at the beginning of this presentation has been recorded and will be posted to our social media, so our Facebook and our YouTube channels. So please feel free to check out this tour or any other previous tours put on by the Timken. And if you needed information for our future tours, which we would love to have you in for, those you can find on the Timken website as well. So I don't see any other questions, but again, thank you so much, Eleanor, for such a fantastic presentation.
Everyone, thank you for your participation.
Of course. Yeah, Annette is saying thank you, very interesting. And Katie says thank you. So again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.